at 8 Eastern and Pacific on C-SPAN's Q&A.
Today, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the U.S. said his country had no choice but to take military action against rebels in Yemen. He also said the rebels in Yemen are getting weapons from Iran. He made the remarks this morning in Washington, D.C. during a panel discussion at the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations.
Ladies and gentlemen, we could come to order, please. And the President of the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations, Dr. John Buchanan.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. This shows that the topic itself is timely, it's relevant, and to some of the participants, it's indeed urgent. We're talking about a region that is hardly marginal, hardly beyond the back of the beyond. We're speaking of a region that has two kinds of oil, turmoil and that other kind, with implications to no end of people's interests, their involvement, their concerns, their key foreign policy objectives, and all of these relate to issues of security and stability. And without security and stability, you have no orderly, effective, peaceful development. Without security, you have no stability. Without the two, you have no foreign direct investment. Without foreign direct investment in a country as poor, as massively poor, and as pervasively poor as Yemen, the future looks more than bleak. Indeed, if it only looked bleak, that perhaps would be an improvement. Now, we have a number of resource specialists. Some of them have devoted their lifetime to Yemen and its implications regionally, globally, nationally, locally, sub-regionally. And these two are on my right, and three Americans on two on my left, including myself. And we will do our best to confine ourselves to 10 minutes each. We'll have a discussion question. We have cards on your chair. Please write a question as opposed to a comment, a speech, a valedictory address, so that we can have a cerebral massage here. In terms of Yemen, I'll just very quickly let you know something about the context and how indeed complicated and complex this country is. But before doing so, we thank the media for being here. If you look around, you'll have a little whiplash there. On the next side, we have 10 of the global, international, national, and regional media filming it live. We appreciate especially C-SPAN, CNN, and all the others that are here to capture this on record for posterity. Now, if the gentleman with the camera there on my left will step aside for a minute, and I hope my voice carries. We're talking about 8 dynamics, 8 Yemens, if you will, just to underscore the complexity. Think of Yemen as Louisiana in the shape of an American state, or boot in terms of a short boot, this being the ankle, this being the heel, this being the ball of the foot, these being the toes. You have at least two factors and forces in northern Yemen that are at odds with one another, and to a degree there's a commonality of interest. You have in the northernmost part of Yemen the base of the Houthis, who were not a household name 10 years ago. People didn't know whether they were animal, vegetable, or mineral, but they are indeed a recognizable, forceful force. Now, south of that area, NCUSAR, which is the capital, has been led by a Zaidi president since the end of the Yemen civil war and revolution, from September 22nd, 1962 to March 14th, 1970. Where Saudi Arabia backed the northern monarchist and Egypt and others backed the southern Sunni tribes. But these divisions of Shia-Sunni are not as pronounced as they are in other places. There's intermarriage between the two. There's a softness, a commonality between the two. It's not the issue that the Western outside media makes it to be. So these are two in the north, and in one area of the north, just to the east of the capital, called Marib, where part of the country's mineral wealth is, their oil and gas reserves. coming down to the south, what used to be the border between the north and the south, Taiz would be the second largest city in the north and the furthest one to the south. But south of Taiz, towards Aden, is another world. And this used to be known as the Western Aden Protectorate. And it is into this area that the Houthis have advanced in the last 2 weeks and are posing a challenge and a threat to Aden. Then there's Aden itself. Aden was a crown colony. Great Britain had only 5 during the reign of Queen Victoria: Gibraltar, Malta, Aden, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And these were the diamonds in the tiara of Queen Victoria's necklace, so to speak. Aden, up until the end of the 1950s, believe it or not, was the world's 5th largest port in terms of tonnage handle and ships calling. You could have more ships in Aden's harbor at the same time than you had in Jeddah, than you had in Massawa and Assad and Djibouti combined twice over up until into the 1960s. But just as Egypt's been the gift of the Nile, says Herodotus, so too has modern Aden been the gift of the Suez Canal. And when the Suez Canal was shut in June '67, the second time in the Arab-Israeli war, it remained closed till 1975. It became a backwater, and it was in this atmospherics when that moment was propitious that Aden lurched, if you will, to the left and further to the left to become a Marxist government. I was the only American allowed to live and work and do research there then. But there's been no other Marxist government in the Arab countries, the Middle East, the Islamic world, like there was in Aden, based on the power in the court and the privilege and the prestige and the prominence of Aden in terms of global international trade. Then to the east of Aden, this area here of Shabwa and Athena and Olakhi and Jaffa estates, these are tribal, small villages there with the typical high skyscraper Yemeni architecture. And they are quite different in terms of what drives them than those that I've just mentioned. And then immediately to the east of them is the Hadramaut. The Hadramaut, through the winds, through the tides, through the currents, has produced around 10 million Yemenis in Indonesia. Within the last 20 years, the Indonesian Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Minister of Education, Minister of Interior, Governor of Jakarta were all from Yemen, this part of Yemen. This is the roots of Osama bin Laden's father, and quite a large number of Yemeni merchants who live in these areas of the region. And then just east of Hadramaut is the Mahra state, M-A-H-R-A. Did not have a single paved road until the last 15 years. And it's quite different. It is from this state here that we're talking about the island of Socotra, which the Soviet Navy had its eyes on at one time and gave some concern to the United States. And this is a reason why Oman, until now, is not in the coalition against the Houthis, because we're talking about a neighbor state here, and Oman's policy will be driven by its neighborliness. And the last factor are the Yemenis outside. The numbers fluctuate up and down. In Saudi Arabia, at times they've been as many as 1 million. You can say that they are 1 million if you include Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman with Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere. Yemenis are all over the world, and probably on the moon, as some say. They were the first Arabs to migrate to Detroit there and work in response to Henry Ford's $5 a day for an honest day's work. I've been to the United Auto Workers unit in Dearborn. The President's Yemeni, Vice President Yemeni, Secretary's Yemeni, Treasurer's Yemeni, in that particular union, the largest in the UAW. This is just to paint a brushstroke of the context here. Now we will go to Jeremy Sharp, who's with the Congressional Research Service. He is the person who does the research, writing, analytical, written work for members of the United States Congress. Their bios are on the materials that you picked up coming in on your seat. I ask that you write a question on the 3x5 cards and pass them to National Council staff who will bring them forward, and I'll use them in the Q&A. Ambassador Adel Al-Jubair is due here around 11 o'clock. He called yesterday to say, I'll be there. And so we're looking for an operational logistical feat, because he's been in the kingdom in the last 72 hours, went, and now he's coming back, and this particular event is highest on his agenda. Jeremy Shaw.
Thank you, John. Wow, I wish I could do that. Just go to a map and give a country's history in a broad brushstrokes. We have a few other countries that could use some of that. Well, first of all, thank you to the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations for hosting this event today. And a welcome not just to the media and our outside guests, but a special thanks to our CRS congressional clients for coming here today. And like a good CRS analyst, I am legally obliged to note that the remarks here this morning are my own and do not represent those of the Congressional Research Service. I'd also like to thank John for moderating this morning. I can tell you firsthand that John can hike the Yemeni highlands better than most men half his age. And I know that because I sort of panted from behind, watching him sort of traverse the Yemeni highlands like a little gazelle. I mean, don't be fooled. John is quite nimble. So thank you for moderating today. Pleasantries aside, this is a particularly unpleasant time for most Yemenis. I am always humbled by the fact that I cover Yemen from a seat here on Capitol Hill, and I'm mindful of the fact that perhaps some of our panelists, perhaps some of you in the audience, have friends or extended family members who are enduring quite an ordeal of suffering right now. So, and suffering that may endure the longer this conflict persists. So I'm constantly mindful of that fact. Now, because I am situated here in Washington, I wanted to gear my remarks toward U.S. policy and what are the implications for Operation Decisive Storm on U.S. policy toward Yemen and the region writ large. So I'm going to make a few policy remarks and then analyze where this is going in the weeks and months ahead. So, number one, the obvious point to start with is that there is a serious political imperative in Washington to demonstrate support for Saudi Arabia at this time, both in the administration and Congress. Whatever you may think of Saudi Arabia's historic involvement in Yemen, for better or for worse, the reality is that U.S. policy in Yemen, which is foremost designed to counter terrorism, is highly dependent on Saudi Arabia, not just for counterterrorism, but for politically and financially supporting a Yemeni central government. This is especially true since the post-Saleh transition that began in late 2011, culminating in early 2012. Now, because the Houthi-Saleh alliance has expanded so far into Yemeni territory, far beyond what most of us thought just a few weeks and months ago, there has been a lot of signal sending by the administration that we understand that a red line has been crossed in Saudi Arabia's mind and that we support their action. This is particularly pertinent amidst the wider regional environment of international environment of an Iran nuclear negotiation and the sensitivity to Sunni Arab perceptions of a regionally emboldened Iran. Now, just a few remarks on Iran for a second. For Iran, who is definitely supporting the Houthis materially and financially, what a great investment Yemen is for Iran. It's a high-return, low-risk investment. I mean, Iran is certainly supporting them, but the level of support doesn't mirror what's being done in Syria. It doesn't mirror what's being done in Iraq. It doesn't mirror what's being done historically in Lebanon. And the media, every time it mentions Iran and Yemen, is just basically doing Iran's work for them. Inflating this prospect. It's definitely a concern, and support could increase in the years ahead, but we have to keep that in mind, that we have to sort of measure what is exactly going on there. Now, U.S. support for Saudi Arabia, back to that, one named U.S. official told the Washington Post last week that we've shown that when it comes to the security of the Persian Gulf countries, we have their back, providing them with unique, indispensable capabilities to facilitate their actions. U.S. support for Saudi Arabia at this time is not just political. There's certainly a material element to it. In the back of the room is my colleague Chris Blanchard. He covers U.S.-Saudi relations, and Chris's report on Saudi Arabia has cataloged and documented Pentagon and Defense Department notifications to Congress that since 2010, there has been planned arms sales to Saudi Arabia of something like over $90 billion. So when you think about that number for a second, when Saudi Arabia goes to war in Yemen, there's a definite U.S. element that's working behind the scenes. If you sell an F-15 to Saudi Arabia, yes, there's a Saudi Arabia pilot, it's a Saudi Arabia-owned plane, but there's U.S. work being done on the maintenance of it. There's U.S. refueling and rearmament, U.S. training of the pilot. When Saudi pilots went down just a few days ago, there was a U.S. search and rescue operation to assist. So there's a lot that we're doing behind the scenes. And the administration is not hiding this fact. The White House issued a statement on the day that Operation Decisive Storm began, blaming the Houthis for causing the crisis in Yemen, recognizing President Hadi as the legitimate leader of Yemen, and President Obama authorized the provision, quote, of logistical intelligence support to GCC-led military operations. And that the administration claimed that while U.S. forces are not taking direct military action in Yemen in support of this effort, we are establishing a joint planning cell with Saudi Arabia to coordinate military and intelligence support. So that's one aspect of the policy, and certainly one that's being played out in public. Now, privately, we can sort of speculate that, yes, we're definitely in support of what's going on, but there's a lot of concern, perhaps, that the longer that this persists, the greater the chance for terrorists on the ground to become empowered. I'm really glad that I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare for this today, because had I not, I wouldn't have checked the news cycle and had seen that there was actually a major operation in Mukalla and the Hadramaut last night, where AQAP terrorists, in what seems like a major operation, attacked certain facilities, and then while one group was attacking the facilities, another group attacked a jail and broke it open, and several hundred AQAP militants escaped, including a high-level senior regional commander. So we know from history, we know from Yemen's history, that when the central security forces dissipate, take sides, abandon their posts, that leaves a vacuum for AQAP, the Islamic State, whomever to take route. And so there's a lot of concern that this is happening, and it may happen continually if the conflict drags on. Now, there's also sort of the immediate concern of how does the U.S. conduct CT operations, counterterrorism operations, in Yemen as this conflict persists. And the administration has released several statements trying to reassure the American public that we will take action if there's an immediate risk to U.S. homeland security, that we have assets in the region, offshore assets, assets in Djibouti, in Saudi Arabia, that we will employ if there's a terrorist threat. At the same time, logic would dictate that if our embassy operations are suspended, if we've pulled out a certain level of military personnel, that's going to certainly impact our on-the-ground knowledge of what's going on. And now, that's an obvious point, but there's also something else that's out there, and that is, since 2006, as part of our CT strategy in Yemen, we've had a train and equip program. And I think one concern that hasn't been expressed in the various pieces on Yemen yet is that if this conflict persists, we've made a lot of investments in the Yemeni military. And if there's damage done to those investments, both material and human, that's going to be a lot harder to reconstitute our program in the years ahead. And so there's a lot of concern that that doesn't take place either. And finally, the fourth part about U.S. policy in this conflict is that the U.S. has really tried to get its own personnel out of harm's way. As I mentioned, we've suspended embassy operations, moved our diplomats to the consulate in Jeddah, and like I mentioned before, we moved some of our, all of our special forces trainers and military personnel out of an air base which was near a nearby town that was attacked by AQAP militants just a day before we evacuated our personnel. Now, where is this all going? We talked about some aspects of U.S. policy, but it's obviously going to be, a lot's going to be dictated by where this conflict goes in the days and weeks and months ahead. And an oversimplified way of looking at things is just to sort of take two tracks. One is that this is a military conflict that the Saudi-led coalition, either by ground, air, there was a BBC report just a few hours ago that there have been maybe land forces in Aden. I have no idea. Some may know better than others if you're on your phone tweeting or whatever. There's a military dimension to this where the coalition just pushes everyone back, push you back from Aden, push the Houthis and Salah back from Taiz, perhaps to the capital, perhaps beyond. But I also think force is being used in another way in statecraft, and I think that's something we need to look at, and that is perhaps force is being used to break apart the Houthi-Salah marriage of convenience. And I think if you look at what's been put out in some of the pan-Arab media lately, there have been a lot of reports of leaks between former President Salah and the international community, claiming that he wants to negotiate a deal for himself, preserve his immunity in Yemen, lift UN sanctions against him in exchange for turning on the Houthis. There's a quote, I don't know if it was him directly, but he said, let's go to dialogue and elections, and I promise you that neither I nor any of my relatives will run for the presidency. And a Houthi spokesman retorted saying, quote, Salah is only doing this to keep his relationship with Saudi and the Gulf states friendly because he wants, above anything else, to protect his personal interests. Now, I don't know exactly what the play here is, but trying to break up this marriage seems like a pretty rational strategy, whether it's by force, by psychological operations, whatever, using the media. Because, look, at its core, Salah is a rational actor who's concerned with his own preservation and the preservation of his family. His son, his place in Yemen, he's the consummate negotiator. I don't know if any of you saw this, but the UN Sanctions Committee a few weeks ago put out a report estimating something that's unbelievable, that Salah has pilfered somewhere between $30 to $60 billion from Yemen over the time in power. I mean, that's like Forbes' list, that puts him toward the top if he hasn't spent it all, supporting patronage in Yemen and his rule. Look, I think that's something to look at, to carefully analyze. What is the deal, if there is any? And what does it mean for President Hadi, especially as we've said that he's the legitimate ruler of Yemen, that the Saudis are doing this on his behalf? If there is one day a negotiation, what is it going to look like in terms of his status? I'll leave it to the rest of you. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. Colonel David DeRoche.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anthony. It's an honor to be on a panel with such distinguished members. I feel like the forgotten member of that early 1970s supergroup, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Leibowitz.
A lot of us can't see you back here.
I'd be delighted.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
La shukr al-wajib. My remarks also do not reflect the view of the National Defense University, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Jeremy's taken a lot of my thunder. It's always awkward when you're in violent agreement with members of the podium, but I'd like to address a few aspects of the national crisis, focusing on security implications on Yemen and its neighbors. I won't get too wonky, but you can ask me questions if you want to know about precision-guided munitions or T-55 tanks. First, background. It's clear to us now, and clearer to the Saudis, that it was a mistake to leave Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen. The calculus at the time was allowing him to remain as head of his party would prevent conflict and bloodshed, a move that hindsight now shows, I admit this, with hindsight, considerable hindsight, that was misguided. It is now clear that Saleh retained or purchased the loyalty of significant parts of the Yemeni armed forces, most notably the Republican Guard. The extent to which the Yemeni armed forces are loyal to al-Hadi was brought into question with this summer's rapid Houthi advance into the capital. There was a tense period of confrontation in the capital, which ended with Hadi's house arrest and the derogation of the Yemeni political system. The lack of a Yemeni armed forces opposition to the Houthi expansion southwards towards Aden can only partly be explained by inefficiency and the normal fighting problems of a patronage-based army. There was some treachery involved as well. There was some turning of units. The Houthis are misunderstood as well. This is important. It is not well known here that in some parts of the country, the Houthis are seen as the vanguard of the general opposition to the established political order in Yemen. That is, they are not a unified fighting force, and their support may be transactional and shallow in parts of the country that we and the Saudis consider as conquered. At the end of the day, all politics in Yemen are tribal, and armies generally do not do well in areas occupied by hostile tribes. Now let me talk a bit about the air campaign. My bias, my career has been spent in the ground forces, but you know, it's important to look at this since that's what we're doing here. The Saudis, for their part, have seemed to have concluded that both the Yemeni Air Force as well as the Yemeni Surface-to-Surface Missile Brigade are under de facto Houthi control and have made a point of targeting those capabilities early in the bombing campaign. They hit the surface-to-surface missile depots twice to make sure that the rubble bounced once it was destroyed. It is interesting to note, though, that with the MiG-21s, they chose to crater the runways and attack hangars, but not the aircraft itself. So there seems to be an idea that the Saudis feel that eventually the Yemeni state will reconstitute itself and will still have those MiG-29s once they do it. But so long as the runway's cratered, they can't fly. The spectacular series of explosions in Sana'a on Tuesday night were proof of the determination of the coalition to prevent retaliation against Saudi soil. Indeed, there have been reports that the Saudis also moved Patriot batteries, and they've upgraded to PAC-3 to the southern border in order to prevent an attack, and a few Saudis have stated that the fear of Yemeni Scuds is what drove the military action. The air campaign in Yemen is impressive. Saudi Arabia, which provides the overwhelming bulk of the air power, has shown that it learned from and improved on its generally unimpressive conduct of the border war with the Houthis in 2009. Most specifically, in 2009, a general criticism, you'll hear it from everybody, was that the Saudi Air Force relied too heavily on newly acquired precision-guided munitions, or PGMs. The result was a poorly coordinated bombing campaign, which did little damage to serious military targets, but stirred up considerable international condemnation for hitting civilians. Reportedly, there were also as many as 1,000 Saudi casualties, and Moroccan and Jordani forces had to deploy to bolster the Saudi forces on the ground. The contrast with now is extremely impressive. The Saudis skillfully laid the political groundwork for building an international coalition, which sends a decisive message to both the Houthis and the Iranians. Most importantly, as Jeremy mentioned, perhaps as a quid pro quo for acquiescence on an eventual Iran deal, the Saudis secured the active cooperation of the United States. The U.S. agreed to provide intelligence and logistics support. Presumably this means at the least help in identifying and picking targets and then assessing of the target after each strike, which is exactly what was lacking in 2009. This could also mean rapid resupply of F-15 parts as well as of precision-guided munitions. So these scarce assets will not only be used more effectively because of enhanced targeting, but also they'll be replaced more rapidly. And of course, as Jeremy mentioned, the American cooperation extended Sunday to the rescue of 2 Saudi pilots who were downed at sea, and that is extremely important. As the air campaign grinds on, however, its effectiveness will decrease not arithmetically, but exponentially. High payoff targets, such as Scud missile depots, are already destroyed. Other targets will be dispersed among civilians or in areas such as mountain valleys where they can be defended by anti-aircraft artillery traps. As we saw with the Kosovo campaign, or with Korea, or with Vietnam, or with World War II in Europe, if you try to achieve a military victory just from the air, you eventually redefine not only your target set, which expands, but also you redefine victory. Air forces cannot seize and hold terrain. Let me say that again. Air forces cannot seize and hold terrain. In Kosovo, the target set expanded as coalition air planners grew frustrated with the lack of political success. The same will happen to this coalition if the military effort is not accompanied by an effective political initiative that offers the Houthis something other than surrender. It's important to discuss what victory means here. The Houthis may not be who we think they are. They have always been among a broad group of Yemenis who are unhappy with political development in the post-Salah era, which appears to have not ended. As airstrikes harden opinion in Yemen, this opposition will become more of a broadly based group. If the airstrikes continue outside the context of an overall political settlement, Yemeni opposition to the coalition will harden, not just among the Houthis, but among average Yemenis. Saudi Arabia and her partners may find that what they thought was a proxy war with Iran will transform into an actual war with Yemen. A word about ground operations. Ground operations by non-Yemeni forces, other than perhaps a limited covering operation aimed at defending the approaches to Aden, if the enemy force, if the Houthi forces can be ejected from Aden. I think the Houthi forces are actually a Saudi armor brigade that just switched sides. They're ill-advised. The Egyptian army lost over 25,000 soldiers in North Yemen in the 1960s. The terrain is mountainous and the infrastructure is rudimentary. An assault on Sana'a from the Red Sea would involve forcing a potentially endless series of Thermopyles. The Yemeni army should, if it wants to, be capable of ousting the Houthis from everywhere south of Sana'a on their own. The question is, who does the army answer to? It appears at the moment to be more Saleh and less Hadi. But loyalties are transient things in Yemen. Hopefully, Saudi influence and money could force a shift back to the Yemeni government. If the bombing campaign continues and the inevitable civilian casualties mount, however, this happy outcome becomes both more expensive and less likely. Now, a word on AQAP, as Jeremy foreshadowed. AQAP remains an important security concern for America. Boko Haram and Daesh get all the press at the moment, but only AQAP has shown both the intent and the capability to mount attacks on the American homeland and indeed on the Saudi Deputy Crown Prince. AQAP is a shared concern. Yemen has been a vital but vacillating power in the campaign against AQAP, and we saw, that in this morning's jailbreak. Saleh was a smart fellow. He is a smart fellow. He realized that if AQAP were defeated decisively, instead of being treated as an American power and partner in the global war on terror, he would be put in the same box as Eritrea, Burma, and other international pariahs. It appears that there were selected local truces with AQAP. The challenge for policymakers in the United States, in the West, and in the Gulf has always been to discern where the line is between treachery, tribal politics, and local government, and the central government lack of capacity. The Houthis and AQAP have fought. There have been bombings and attacks carried out by one side on the other. But it would be foolhardy to suppose these two forces will cancel each other out. The fighting with the Houthis, who are of regional concern, has detracted from the fight against AQAP, who is of global concern. Finally, a word on Iran. Iran did not give birth to the Houthis, and the support of the Houthis is not vital to their success. They've survived on their own. They have exploited the opportunity to stick their thumb in the eye of the Saudis, and it is possible that the Saudis may like their distaste for Iran to cloud their better judgment. I've skimmed over a number of things. I'd be happy to take your question, but let me close by saying there is no military solution to the current political problems of Yemen, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We now have Mr. Abbas Mosawa, a Yemeni journalist who's also served in diplomatic situations in Abu Dhabi as well as Beirut, and he's an editor of a widely well-received, respected journal. Mr. Al-Mosawa, and translating simultaneously for him will be Dr. Imad Ab.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I will speak Arabic inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أنا ربما لا أتحدث الإنجليزية بصورة جيدة، لكنني أجيد العربية كوني ضليع فيها. سيساعدني الأستاذ على ترجمة ما أقول. وأنا جالس والأساتذة يتحدثون تذكرت قول الشاعر اليمني: ماذا أحدث عن صنعاء يا أبتي مريضة غزاها السل والجرب. قد نكون نعيش في مأساة حقيقية بعد الربيع العربي 2011. تعرفون اليمن يعيش بجوار دول متخمة بالمال، ويعيش أيضا أرض خصبة بسبب هشاشة الدولة وتواجد التنظيمات المتطرفة كالقاعدة، وأخيرا قيل أن هناك داعش. آخر الأخبار التي أتتني أن تنظيم القاعدة توسع في محافظة حضرموت واقتحم السجون وأطلق 300 من أخطر عناصر تنظيم القاعدة.
Good morning, everybody. It's greetings to everyone. I will be translated, and he cited a little verse from a Yemeni poet. Basically, the idea is that there is a real tragedy going on in Yemen, since the Arab Spring, and many factors coalesce. Basically, a weak state, Al-Qaeda in Yemen, and Daesh, and now Al-Qaeda seems to be getting stronger in Hadramaut.
الأخبار الآتية من اليمن أن هناك عصابات تتحارب لإثبات وجودها بعد أن أزالت الدولة، وهناك أيضا دول تتحالف لقصف ما تبقى من هشاشة الدولة. بمعنى آخر أن الدولة أو شبه الدولة يتجاذبها طرفان: التنظيمات المتطرفة والطيران العربي بالتعاون الأمريكي والأوروبي. قضت هذه الضربات على ما تبقى من النواة الصلبة للقوات المسلحة التي ستحافظ على الدولة وعلى الأمن بعد زوال الحوثيين. الحوثيون بالتأكيد كما كنت دوما رافضا لهم ورافضا لكل الحركات التي تحمل السلاح لتطبق وتفرض شروطها بالقوة، وقدمت لذلك الكثير. جزء من أسرتي، منزلي دمره الحوثيون، لكنني هنا وطني أسمى وأكبر من الحوثيين وسواهم. أريد أن أتحدث بشكل موجز. تفضل.
There are many armed groups in Yemen, and now apparently there is the remnants of whatever is left of the Yemeni state are being destroyed by a coalition of Arab, American, and European forces. I am not a Houthi lover. They actually have attacked my family, my people, and they have basically carried arms against the central state.
تذكروا أن أبي وأمي وأخي وأختي وولدي وجيراني أيضا تحت القصف، وأيضا يهددونهم الحوثيون وتنظيم القاعدة، ولذلك سأحاول أن أتجرد من مشاعري كيمني وأتحدث كباحث وكسياسي وكدبلوماسي سابق ربما له إحاطة وعلم بأدق التفاصيل التي تحدث في اليمن. أولا، اليمن بالتأكيد في الفترة الأخيرة مارس الحوثيون دور ما يمارسه أيضا الثوار في ليبيا، حاولوا انتزاع السيادة بالقوة. كان هذا مدعوم من دول الغرب وقيل أنها ثورة، هم يقولون أنهم يمارسون نفس الدور ويمارسون الثورة. استعملوا السلاح في فرض رؤاهم، أجندتهم، طاردوا رئيس الجمهورية من مكان إلى آخر، أخرجوه من عدن. طلب هذا الرئيس الشرعي التدخل الدولي، فقام هذا التدخل الدولي بقصف الجيش. الأخبار أن الحوثي أنها بوجهة نظري أنها ضربة خدمت الحوثي جدا، خدمت تنظيم القاعدة جدا، خدمت التنظيمات المتطرفة جدا، جعلت الناس ينظرون إليه أنه بطل قومي بعد أن كان ساقط من قلوب الناس وعيونهم.
The Houthis have actually used the Libyan example. They have used arms against everybody else, but they have expelled the president from the legitimate president. They have basically attacked the state. But the problem is that the current conflagration, the current war, is actually assisting the Houthis.
بطريقة أكثر اختصارا، المملكة العربية السعودية، إيران، كل منهما يحمل مشروعا وأيديولوجيا يتصارعون في سوريا، في العراق، في اليمن، في ليبيا، وكذلك في لبنان.
Both Saudi Arabia and Iran have their own agendas. They're basically using Yemen, Libya, Iraq, Syria to basically eke it out at each other.
إيران تدعم الحوثيين، حزب الله، عصائب أهل الحق، جيش المهدي، وهذه تنظيمات ننظر إليها أنها متطرفة تقتل على الهوية وتقتل على المذهب. والجهة الأخرى تقول أيضا أن السعودية تدعم التنظيمات الأخرى المتطرفة. طبعا لنا وجهة نظر في هذا الاتجاه، وأنا لا أعتقد، ربما هناك أخطاء استراتيجية كبرى ارتكبتها الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، حيث هناك أمثلة كثيرة جدا أن الضربات الجوية دمرت الدول لكنها لم تستطع أن تبني دولة. العراق مثلا من 2001 وهو يعاني الصراع من 2003، وكذلك أفغانستان 2001، ليبيا 2011، وسوريا أيضا الحبل على الجرار. وبتصوري أن العمل سيستمر ولن تقوم لهذه الدول قائمة نظرا للثارات التي حدثت ولسقوط الدول من أعين شعوبها، وأيضا وجود التنظيمات المتطرفة التي تحمل السلاح وتنافس الدولة.
Iran supports its own groups. At the same time, Saudi Arabia supports its own groups, and the U.S. have committed many egregious strategic mistakes in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and the problem is you get rid of somebody else, but you don't build something instead.
في اليمن الثارات، القبيلة، العصبويات، التنظيمات المتطرفة، وأكثر من 60 مليون قطعة سلاح. تخيلوا معي أن هذا البلد الذي يشرف على 2000 كيلومتر مربع هي حدوده مع المملكة العربية السعودية، أكثر من 2800 كيلومتر مربع حدوده البحرية، عدد لا بأس به من الحدود المفتوحة مع سلطنة عمان مع الصحراء، يتحول إلى أرض خصبة للميليشيات المسلحة التي لا تؤمن بالدولة ولا تؤمن ببقاء الجوار.
Yemen basically has 2,000 kilometer border with Saudi Arabia. It has 1,800 borders on the sea. It has become really grounds for a lot of groups that are doing harm.
إضافة إلى الفقر الذي يضرب أعماق اليمنيين، والإضافة أيضا أن الدولة برئيسها، وهذه حقيقة أريد أن أقولها، أن الحرس الجمهوري والقوات الجمهورية والقوات الخاصة التي كانت تأتمر بأمر رئيس الجمهورية هو الذي وجهها وقال لها لا تقاوم الحوثي. أوامر عسكرية مباشرة من رئيس الجمهورية طلب منها لا تقاوم الحوثي ولا تقاتلوا في كل مراحل الصراع. الأمر الثالث، نعم هذه الحركة، حركة الحوثي، حركة مسلحة تؤمن بالعنف، تقاتل للوصول إلى السلطة، ما إن تم لها إسقاط الدولة وإسقاط رئيسها حتى بدأت بالتهديدات وقالت أنها ستغزو المملكة وستسقط بلاد الحرمين وستسقط حرفيا آل سعود. هنا سأتحدث عن الحركة بشكل مقتضب، لكنني أنا ضد القصف وضد الضرب وضد الحرب أيا كان نوعه وضد الدم، لأن الحرب عندي في مفهومي في ملتي في أخلاقي هي الدماء وهي الأشلاء وهي الأيتام وهي الأرامل وهي الديور المهدمة والحارات المقفرة والشوارع الخالية.
The state is weak. President Saleh's Republican Guard has helped the Houthis do what they want to do. The Republican Guard actually helped the Houthis gain whatever ground they have been able to gain. The Houthis are not necessarily state builders. I myself hate war. War is only for destruction.
قيل لنا أن الحرب هي حرب الضرورة. أنا بالتصور أن المملكة العربية السعودية ربما لم تكن تملك خيار آخر بعد أن دعتهم للحوار هناك في أراضيها وحاولت أن تقدم وترعى المبادرة الخارجية ودفعت لذلك الكثير، لكن ربما هم الذين أوصلوا اليمن إلى هذا النفق المسدود وهذا الحائط أيضا المسدود الذي سد المرحلة السياسية بكل أفقها. لكن أنا بالتصور الشخصي أنه كان بالإمكان الوصول إلى الحل السياسي. الحرب لا يمكن أن تأتي بنتيجة. الذي يدفع الثمن الآن هم الضعفاء والمساكين وهو الشعب اليمني بقواته ومؤسساته. الحوثيون أيها السادة استفادوا من هذه الحرب جدا. قال لي أحد الأشخاص أن الحوثي من 3 أيام و4 أيام من بداية القصف طالب عون شعبي للقتال، توجه معه وسجل ونحو 1,400,000 مقاتل انضم إليه بعد أن كانوا 6,000 مقاتل. والسلام عليكم.
It's said that this war is a war of necessity. I really don't think so. There have been many opportunities for a political solution, but it's said that Saudi Arabia does not have a choice. It does have a choice. All parties have a choice for a peaceful resolution of the problem. Basically, the idea is that this war is really helping the Houthis do whatever they want to do instead of weakening them. My apologies, I missed out on one thing. He did mention something about there are probably at least 15 million weapons among the people in Yemen.
Thank you, Mr. Musawa, and thank you, Dr. Harb. Our last resource specialist is Ms. Sama Al-Hamdani. Any of you who are students of genealogy and ethnic groups, tribal groups, historical dynamics in Arabia, know that the Al-Hamdani have strong roots, impeccable roots. Sama Al-Hamdani. Please come here.
Sure.
She's an analyst for Al Jazeera English and Arabic, BBC, NPR, and CNN's analyst on Yemen.
So I have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to be here and to see so many people in the audience who care about Yemen. To the Yemenis here and to our brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for coming. I'm actually going to do something different here that I don't usually do at my other talks. Rather than focusing plainly on the politics and on the analysis behind everything, I would like to say that when I first came here, I came to study university and I never thought that I would stay in this country. My hope was to go back. Of course, this is becoming less and less of a reality. The situation in Yemen has gotten significantly worse every year. And as of recently, a friend of mine sent me a photo of a drawing done by a child who's 6 years old of planes dropping bombs on them. And I realized how bad the situation has gotten. I myself was in Yemen in 1994 during the Civil War, and I participated in the Children Draw for Their Rights program. But I never thought that I would draw a plane with things falling on my head. Having said that, I would like to represent the voice of Yemeni people, considering I speak to so many people on the ground in the north and south of Yemen. I want to begin with Aden, that is really suffering today. So many people have died. People are talking about bodies piling up on the ground without being able to pull it away. The fighting in Aden is a result of Houthi fighting with elements of AQAP and Adani locals. The shootings are random and have targeted everyone. In Al-Dala alone, there are 63,000 internally displaced people. People from Sana'a have fled into villages. And at the moment, a lot of people can't go anywhere because of this shifting of movements. The airstrikes won't stop. Rather than talking about corruptions and politicians and having the blame game when we talk about Iran and Saudi Arabia fighting each other, we forget that there are 26 million people stuck between these names that we talk about. Everything that we see today, it's important to note, is a result of having a weak government, having a weak leader. The government had an opportunity from 2011 to 2014 to deliver services to the people, to do anything, which left a vacuum for the Houthis to step up and take the plate. Yemen at the moment is surrounded. Our territorial water and our airspace is considered a no-fly zone. Nothing can go in or out. A lot of Yemen's population is dependent on humanitarian aid. Having said that, besides the humanitarian aid, we actually import a lot of our oil. About 80% of our gasoline is imported from the outside, and our revenues can only last for up to 3 weeks. Right before this war started, we were expecting another shipment that we did not receive. That means that there is inflation, oil prices are going up, the dollar is really, really up. It's impossible to find it in the market. And there are laws now restricting people on how to find gasoline. Of course, in Yemen, we depend on gas for more than just cars. We need it for electricity. We don't have electricity. The country is running out of water. At the moment, a lot of the countries that are participating in this coalition are claiming that they're there to save Yemen. However, 4,900 people, more than that actually, it's increasing every day, are stuck at airports worldwide because no country would grant them visas. Yemenis have been eliminated, don't have the opportunity to get visas to enter anywhere. And at the moment, Yemenis, the only country accepting Yemenis as refugees is Somalia. We have in Yemen 2,400,000 Somalian refugees on the ground. We have Iraqi refugees. We have Syrian refugees. Yemen has worked as a home and opened its doors up to these refugees. However, no other countries are opening their doors for our refugees or immigrants, and that is very tragic. Past that, since we are technically in a siege, we don't have medical supplies for those who are wounded. We don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough medication. And the situation in Aden and Saada is getting really, really bad. This could expand to the governorates of Taz and Ib and maybe even Madab. Talking about this airstrike, I constantly think, how can you curb an ideology by launching airstrikes against the people? We've learned before through the drone strikes or through other experiences that you cannot fight an ideology by dropping bombs. You need a proper government infrastructure, you need a better education, you need a development plan, you need to employ people in order to shift them from fighting with militias into participating in good governance. Moreover, a lot of the airstrikes have targeted military sites and military bases, meaning if there is a leader that's going to go back to Yemen, and if President Hadi goes back to Yemen, he will not have a military to lead. They will have to start everything from zero. They have to build that infrastructure from nothing. And everybody here on this panel has talked about the role of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen. Just yesterday, they freed 300 prisoners from Al-Mukalla prison and are taking advantage of this opportunity to expand on the ground. The problem with this war is that the only group that was capable of defeating and fighting Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was, in fact, the Houthis. And what's worse is that the Houthis took these airstrikes to go to the south and commit atrocities, and they're blaming everything on President Hadi from escaping from Sana'a to Aden, claiming that he dragged the war there. Of course, our southern brothers and sisters are suffering from the consequences of these politicians. At the same time, AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, has looted Sana'a Central Bank, and we are still not sure of how much money they took. What's worse than that is that we have on the ground, if we talk about the scenario of having on the ground troops, it's going to be really hard to distinguish who's who in Yemen, considering that the military going in is not going to know the geography of Yemen very well and is not going to be able to distinguish who they're shooting at by just looking at them. I call on the ethics and rules of jus ad bellum, just war theory. I request that the Saudi government reveal the targets that they've attacked, and I actually ask them to be transparent about who they're attacking and to give people notice of the areas that they're going to target. Just a few days ago in Sana'a, they attacked a weapons depot that was in the heart of Sana'a, and this weapons depot was targeted or blew up. All the weapons in there self-imploded, and missiles came out of that mountain in every direction, and that was in a heavily populated area. All of the areas where these airstrikes are taking place are in Taz, Sana'a, Hudaydah, and Aden, and they are the most heavily populated areas again. So far, we don't have any international NGO workers in Yemen. We can't get the right statistics. However, within the last 24 hours, we had several NGOs come up with rough drafts of the number of deaths that are happening there. Considering that there are no journalists on the ground and it's very hard to tell what's happening and who's killing who, I personally depend on the Saudi government to provide us with their targets to know what's going on. Besides the effects on human being, whether psychological or physical, I want to pay attention to what's happening to the biodiversity of Yemen. A lot of these weapons are going to cause environmental damage and probably are going to affect people's health long term if we don't know what weapons they're using and who they're targeting. The repercussions of this could be very great. We already have smuggling in Yemen and illegal markets. For me personally, as a woman, I wonder what that means to my sisters back home in Yemen. Are they going to be part of a smuggling operation? Would they be trafficked as wives? Would they be... I just don't know what's going to happen, and the idea itself terrifies me. Looking at what is happening in Aden at the moment and this chaos, I'm very worried about other minorities in Yemen as well. This is the time to launch attacks on them, and we have to look at other minorities and protect them. I guess this is me stepping out of my professional realm, and I do request that the humanitarian law is implemented in Yemen. Unfortunately, Yemenis now are stuck between fire coming in and between fire from within. A lot of the people have not had the chance to make plans to evacuate. There are no flights coming in or out of Yemen. For instance, Yemen has many Yemeni Americans, and roughly there are 40,000 Yemeni Americans, American citizens in Yemen trapped in this fire. And so every other country has citizens there that they cannot evacuate. I think that it's very necessary for the government of Saudi Arabia that is leading the coalition. Of course, it's not the only country responsible for this, but to reveal what political agenda they have in the future for Yemen. What is their plan? And I also urge them to have a plan, another backup plan, because everything that is happening in Yemen now is a result of having only one plan in Yemen, which was Yemen's National Dialogue Conference, which I have to say failed miserably. Having said all of these things, I think that we need to pay attention to the governorates of Marib, Al-Bayda, Ta'az, and Ib. Those are going to have a lot of turmoil in the future. And talking about the military, moving forward, I really urge the U.S., Saudi, and other countries, the 9 other countries participating, to pay attention and learn lessons of the NATO in Libya, of the GCC in Syria, of the U.S. in Iraq. It's very important moving forward of paying attention to how to restructure the military. Everything that we're talking about today, analysts like myself have warned of a long time ago. We've warned about the failure of Yemen's national dialogue. We've warned about the expansion of the Houthis out of Sa'da into the capital. We've warned and warned and warned. And unfortunately, I feel that our voices are not heard. And here I am today, I'm warning about the repercussions of this war continuing. Yemen is going to be a disaster, and Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is expanding. ISIS declared a state in Lahj and has carried out an operation in Sana'a. So this is an opportunity for me to warn that if this war is continuing without a clear plan, without an opportunity to save people, it's just going to recruit more people in the fight into the Houthi side or into Al-Qaeda side, but it definitely is going to move all Yemenis against the side of Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Therefore, I urge everybody to I urge all the analysts to request a humanitarian ceasefire for the people to make plans of evacuation, to find places to move. A lot of people are trapped in their own houses, and our resources are about to go down. I also ask for the allowance of shipments of aid and so on to enter the country, for the return of some NGOs in, for allowing Doctors Without Borders to come in to treat the patients. Otherwise, a lot of those who are wounded would die out of not getting the proper health care. And at this point, I'd like to end my conversation, but I'd like to point out that I'm also very well versed in Yemeni politics and in the Iranian-Saudi war. So if you guys want to ask about that too, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Hamdani, and I commend all of the speakers for confining themselves to the assigned 10-minute period. Now we have the time for discussion and questions, and we've asked individuals to write their questions on 3x5 cards, bring them forward, so that we have real questions as opposed to statements and valedictory addresses there. Several have been asked to me, and while I'm standing, I'll answer them as quickly as I can. One is, hasn't too much been made of the Sunni-Shia divide here? I made in my opening remarks a yes in the case of Yemen, because the divisions between the Sunnis and the Shia there are rather soft. Historically, they've cooperated. There's intermarriage. There's nothing nearly as pronounced as you find to the northern part of the Arabian Peninsula, although it does exist. It is true that Egypt came and had up to 70,000 to 80,000 troops in support of the so-called Sunnis, or the Shafi'i, from 62 to 67. And it's true that Saudi Arabia plus Iran, I pause there, plus Iran backed those in northern Yemen who were the monarchists as such. Now that itself is a window for one. Secondly, in terms of people saying that Saudi Arabia is adamantly anti-Shia, ponder the following. Throughout the 60s and the 70s, Saudi Arabia cooperated most closely, geopolitically, geostrategically, with Iran, whose head of state was Shia. In terms of the Yemen government over the years, who has Saudi Arabia supported most? A Shia head of state. And indeed, Saudi Arabia's aid to northern Yemen and southern Yemen has been greater than that of the World Bank, the IMF, the United States, Great Britain, the Netherlands combined. Aspects of it have pertained also to Lebanon. and the Taif Accord in 1989. It was Saudi Arabia that pushed for a reconfiguration of power in Lebanon, which enabled the Shia elements in Yemen and Lebanon to have a greater percentage of power and authority and influence position than they had before. These are 4 cases there. And one can add with regard to Syria, Saudi Arabia's long-standing relationship with Syria before the recent troubles has been with a government headed by an offshoot of the Shia faith. So these are 4 examples of reaching out beyond ethnicity, beyond religion, beyond sectarian dynamics and divides to cooperate on interest and strategic commonalities and identicality. With regard to Ali Abdullah Saleh, what is he into? I subscribe to what Dave Roche and some others said. But here you have a situation of an individual who feels that he was ditched or not supported when the Arab Spring came about, and did not want to see Yemen devolve into what happened in Iraq, when you got rid of a strong person but did not replace the strong person with another strong person. And the same thing in Libya. That situation is in shambles. And one has to ask with regard to Syria, what after Bashar Assad? It's most of the 17 Christian sects in Syria happen to be beholden to the Al-Assad family. This doesn't come out in the media, but it's on one of the questions here. What are the implications for that in terms of getting rid of a strong man in Yemen? And so here we have Ali Abdullah Saleh, more than 30 years of being in power. No head of state in Yemen knows the tribes, the families, the marriages, the ethnic groups, the geographic groups, the municipalities more than that individual. He's still alive. Yemen yearns for security and stability. To completely rule him out on grounds of dislike, of corruption, of misrule, all understandable, but what about the implications of doing that, given what we've seen where other strong people have been removed there? And this aspect with regard to the United States goes back to the 90s, when Yemen held the chair of the United Nations Security Council and did not go along with the consensus to use force to restore Kuwait's national sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity. Yemen paid a big price for that, and Ali Abdullah Saleh was the one who drove those policies. So the country did indeed suffer from that aspect of his leadership. But when people talk about dictatorial, okay, authoritarian, okay, strong person rule, okay, backwardness, yes and no. Backwardness development-wise, economic-wise, but not necessarily in terms of a civil society. Having been the observer from 93's election, 97's, 2000s and 2006, I was just one of 33. But the consensus was that these elections were as fair and free and open and transparent as anyone would find among the 130 developing countries. Do not overlook that. And in 1998, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright chose Yemen, of all countries in the world, to host an emerging democracies forum. So there are these windows on Yemen that must not be overlooked. And the development in the south, etc. Aden was almost an overdeveloped city in comparison to the other cities of Arabia up until independence in 1967. So we're talking about the waste of a lot of talent with regard to the Yemeni people who are extraordinarily hard workers and productive and contributive. This part, too, seems to be lost in the account. And then lastly, with regard to the South, it's not unanalogous to South Sudan and Khartoum. South Sudan is but one part of Sudan. It demanded 50% of the country's oil revenues, leaving out Darfur in the west, leaving out the north in Nubia, leaving out the east. And one wonders why you had a reaction of violence by these three other regions. In the case of North Yemen and South Yemen, with the unity in 1990 South Yemen played a hard hand and ended up with 50% of the power, 50% of the cabinet posts, and the other 50% the deputy ministers, when the percentage of the population was only 1/7, 1/15. So you can see why the South wanted to retain its powers or regain its powers, but you can also see the animus of the North, many of whom thought the South took too much, got too much, didn't deserve as much. Now, Jeremy Sharp, on the questions of the United States relationship with Yemen, what are the implications of this? Is this likely to result in an increased depth and breadth of anti-Americanism, hatred towards the United States, the longer that this conflict continues?
Sorry, I feel like I should give my opening remarks all over again because I was sitting down and not at the podium. Look, one side of me thinks that on any given day, even when there's not a major international operation in Yemen, it's never a good situation, as my panelists described. I mean, this is a country with incredibly low socioeconomic indicators in terms of human development. Now, on the U.S. side, I mean, we have, a history now of U.S. kinetic operations in Yemen that we've, talked about publicly in our own discourse here in Washington, where, mistakes have been made, civilians have been killed. That obviously engenders a great deal of discord directed against the United States. And certainly, like my panelist said, if there are more airstrikes that hit dairy factories or weapons depots in civilian areas, I mean, that's also going to sow a lot of discord. And in terms of, U.S. operations, maybe not necessarily Saudi, I mean, you're getting into sort of broader questions about how we conduct counterterrorism operations, not just in Yemen, but in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria. These are questions that are, unresolved and sort of open for debate. How do we protect our own homeland security without, creating new breeds and generations of terrorists? And it's being tested in Yemen, and it's going to be tested elsewhere. And I don't have the answer to that debate, but it's worth revisiting, certainly.
Colonel DeRoche, how long will the logistics, the operational assets on the ground in Yemen likely last, including munitions, ammunition? And what are the implications for U.S.-Yemeni defense cooperation that's now on hold, paralyzed, idling at the intersection? How do you assess this situation? What is your estimate, prognosis?
Thank you, sir. Well, the Saudi military spokesman, General Al-Asiri, has said that the Saudi targets are depots, missiles, installations, then vehicles, and then rebel lines of communication. And unfortunately, a rebel line of communication is what you and I would call a road. So the target set is already fairly broad. What you'll see happen is some forms of precision-guided munitions will run out relatively quickly because there's just not a lot of stocks of them, and they're difficult to replace. We don't know for sure what's been used, but based on what they've bought, I assume Paveway and Brimstone, which are both British produced, and they're only used by Britain and Saudi Arabia. So if those, the production line is relatively small, it's incapable of surging. They'll probably run out of that very quickly, and what you'll see is Typhoon and Tornado will have to move back up to the north. The JDAMs, on the other hand, which are the former McDonnell Douglas snap-ons to dumb bombs that allow them to be GPS guided. Those are very cheap. There's a lot of them. They're easy to move around. Those will probably become the target. The paradox is the Saudi stocks of PGMs will probably decline at the same time that the targets become harder to find. So you have fewer precision-guided munitions at the time when your targets require more precision-guided munitions, and your political frustration increases, which leads to a sense of doing something, which is why I think that it's time to put away the stick and show the carrot. You have to have a political solution here because we're not going to be able to make it happen. The second question about the U.S. Military support to Yemen. Right now, there's a lot of, I would imagine there's a lot of consternation within U.S. circles because a lot of the things that we've given to the Yemenis, such as night vision goggles, we simply can't account for. And these are things that, we try to track closely, that we inventory on a monthly basis. I actually inventoried the Yemeni parachute brigade's night vision goggles. I got to inspect it several years ago. It was immaculate. We don't know where those are. And unless we can establish where they are, we're not going to send more things of that nature. So there will be cooperation if there is an entity we can cooperate with, particularly against a common enemy like the guys who just busted out of El-Muqalla. But it will be very, very low level, and it will be very, very low tech until such time as we can be assured that the high tech things that people ask for, like night vision goggles, are capable of being accounted for. Thank you.
Okay. Two more for Jeremy Sharp, and then panelists on my right, your left. Can you talk about the implications, potential, for this 10-state Arab coalition to be engaged in the challenges pertaining to Syria, and possibly against ISIS, or to try to restore a semblance of security and stability in Iraq? Jeremy Sharp.
That's not an Egypt question. Is there an Egypt question? An Egypt question?
Oh, yeah. And then if one could analyze Egypt's position, Egypt's role. We've read in recent days that the United States has lifted its ban or sanctions or hold on munitions and armaments to Egypt, and that Egypt is to be the location of a 35,000 Arab ground force for this United Arab Joint Defense Command, for which there's an air component, which is much smaller, just a few thousand, and a naval component, perhaps double that. But those two combined, multiplied by 7, would be the ground forces. Now, who's paying for this? Largely Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries, but not all. And who else is involved in this? Morocco is, Jordan is. You may recall in the last 4 years a geostrategic pronouncement that the GCC countries would be more aligned, associated with Jordan and Morocco, fellow monarchies. So this is not completely new with regard to reaching out to those two countries. But reaching out to Sudan is, in part because Sudan is a neighbor of Egypt and has its own armed forces, but in an effort to broaden the diversity of the coalition. Mr. Sharp.
No, I would say that it's certainly not new, as John points out. But we are at a moment, one of the interesting strategic things to think about in terms of this conflict in Yemen, and really what's been going on since the so-called Arab Spring began in 2011, is this concept of regional integration, albeit military or economic, something that's been talked about for decades, right? If you look at just from the economic side, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE are financially supporting countries that fiscally can't do it themselves anymore, whether it's Egypt, Jordan, certainly Yemen needs the assistance. All of these countries now, the GCC states, they have the reserves right now, but they're already running budget deficits. And the costs of the region are going up exponentially, whether it's military integration or economic integration. We may be at a moment here. Who knows how operationally this joint force is going to work, or where it will be deployed in the future. But this may be the beginning of, we're at a point where we just can't sort of laugh this off anymore. Like, oh yeah, they talk about integration, they make these deals, but it never really happens. No, this actually may be the start of something both financially and militarily that has some legs, just because the region itself is getting to the point where it's so bad that they need that kind of assistance.
These questions, shifting gears here to Abbas al-Musawa and Sama al-Hamdani. Could the two of you comment on the way that this discussion is going with regard to the questions asked and the answers provided? Is this another case of American lack of empathy and inability or limitation of Americans to project themselves into the shoes, souls, situations, needs, concerns, interests, and objectives of other peoples? Your comments on the Americanism aspect, anti-Americanism, the American role, backing Saudi Arabia, saying it will support this 10-state coalition, providing intelligence, operational, logistical, munition support. Are you in accord with these answers, these American perceptions? In Iraq, hundreds of Americans were cocksure that they knew Iraq and could plan and predict and anticipate effectively, cost-effectively and efficiently what the United States did. And most would agree it's a disaster that Iraq was smashed to smithereens, lost its national sovereignty, lost its political independence, lost its territorial integrity, lost the four things that are in America's Constitution as to why America exists, namely to provide domestic safety, to assure for the external defense, to enhance material well-being, and to ensure the administration of an effective system of civil justice. All four of those things were also smashed. The United States cannot blame others for those results. What are your answers to these controversial, implicitly challenging kinds of questions?
Thank you. السؤال متفرع لكنه يضعني أمام حقائق كثيرة جدا، وأنا تحدثت في السابق وقلت أنني سأكون متحدثا عميقا في الموضوع بدون أي مشاعر وبلد وجوار وآخره. التعليق على الأسئلة، هل الأسئلة التي أجاب عليها الإخوان ربما أنا أفهم الإنجليزية جيدا لكن لا أتحدثها جيدا. أنا أرى أن هناك بعض المعلومات الناقصة. فهم المجتمع اليمني أعتقد أنه بحاجة إلى سبر أغوار وإلى التعمق أكثر في الشعب اليمني. شعب محافظ جدا، شعب لون واحد، شعب قبلي، شعب كثير موالي لجواره ومحب له. أمريكا وعلاقتها باليمن، أنا أتصور أن أمريكا يهمها أمر اليمن، لكن من باب أمني. أمريكا تنظر إلى اليمن على أنه القاعدة وعلى أنه داعش، لم تنظر إلى اليمن على أنه اليمن. تنظر على اليمن على أنه موقع استراتيجي، تنظر لليمن على أنه باب المندب. يهم الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية والتجارة العالمية والنفط وإلى آخره الاستقرار في اليمن، لكن أنا بتصوري أن هذه الضربة ستحقق الآتي: حرب الأهلية كحد أقصى بدأت بوادرها، طبعا هي حرب أهلية بكل ما تعني الكلمة معنى، وانفصال كحد أدنى. ربما تحقق هذه الضربات الجوية نوع من الاستقرار الجغرافي في بعض مناطق اليمن، ربما الجنوب مثالا إذا حصل إنزال بري إلى آخره. ربما هناك تضاريس تساعد على الاقتحام، ربما تساعد على القصف نظرا لأن المنطقة صحراوية. لكن هذا سيشكل أيضا مشكلة أخرى، أنه سيرسم جغرافيا لا يقبلها اليمنيون، وبالتالي سنعود إلى سيناريو الرعب والرعب المضاد. علاقة المملكة العربية السعودية واليمن، أنا أقول لكم بكل صراحة، أنا يمني، هناك أكثر من 2 مليون يمني يعيشون في المملكة ويعملون هناك. علاقتنا معهم تاريخية، علاقة لون، جنس، قبيلة، لغة، دين، معتقد. لا توجد هناك الكثير من الفوارق أبدا، لا توجد فوارق مطلقة. الحوثي وقصة الحوثي هم 2% يشكلون من إجمالي القوة اليمنية أو القوة إجمالي السكان، ليسوا الزيدية طبعا. الأمر الثاني، هناك ملحوظة مهمة جدا، ذكر أن هناك سنة والشيعة. يا جماعة، للمرة الألف، للمرة المليون، لا يوجد في اليمن شيعة، يوجد في اليمن زيدية. الزيدية في الفقه الإسلامي هي الأقرب إلى السنة. الأمر الثاني، وهذا مهم جدا، أنا لا أحب الحديث في الطائفية، وأنا أنظر للذي يحدد موقفه من الآخر على أساس أنه طائفي أو معتقد. أنا أرى أنها ضد حقوق الإنسان وحريته في المعتقد. يا أخي، دعني أعبد الله كيفما أشاء، وأن تعبده كيفما تشاء. ديننا يقول لكم دينكم ولي دين. أنا أتحدث بدون والله راحت علي، معذرة، ما تنبهني يا أخي.
I tried to get
فاهم لغة عربية والسلام عليكم، مش فاهم يقول لي وقف.
I tried to get as much of that as possible. Well, there's definitely a great lack of information on Yemen. Yemen is a tribal society, yes, but it is a very, very loving tribal society. They love each other, they love their neighbors. The idea of sectarianism, Sunni, Shia, as far as he's concerned, the Zaydis are not even Shia. They're closer to the Sunnis than they are to the Shia. So, and the Houthis are part of Yemeni society. The Shia of Yemen or the Zaydis of Yemen are part of Yemeni society. They have been there and they will remain there. The issue is that the U.S. relation with Yemen basically is based on security issues. What do we do with Al-Qaeda? What kind of role Yemen plays as far as Bab al-Mandab is concerned? The question is definitely broader than what the United States wants to look at Yemen around. I don't like to talk of sectarianism, and Yemen is for everybody.
ربما هناك بعض المعلومات تفقد أهميتها بعد انتهاء الحدث، لكن سأحدثكم بمعلومة خاصة كانت ربما سرية في السابق، لكن الآن ممكن نتحدث عنها. قبل التدخل الطيران السعودي أو القصف السعودي الخليجي الأمريكي، كنا نحضر لثورة لإسقاط الحوثي كحركة مسلحة، وهيئنا لذلك الكثير من وسائل الإعلام بمجهود ذاتي بالطبع. اليمنيون لا يرضون مطلقا أن تأتي هذه الحركة لتختطف الدولة والعقل والمعتقد والهوية والمستقبل. في الاتجاه الآخر كانت القبائل اليمنية قد حشدت في كل حدودها، وكانت هناك حدود تقريبا أكثر من 300 كيلومتر مربع هي حدود حماية للمملكة العربية السعودية بين المملكة وحدود اليمنية، كلها قبائل تختلف مع الحوثي أيديولوجيا، فكريا، سياسيا، معتقدا، وأيضا تختلف معه ورفضت وجوده وحملت السلاح. بمعنى آخر، كانت الحدود مؤمنة بحدود 300 كيلومتر وأكثر من 300 كيلومتر مربع، وكان الناس ينتظرون لحظة الانقضاض أو ربما تحرير البلد من الحوثي. نشرت العربية شريطا مهما جدا. هذا الشريط يقول آتي، وأنا ربما أصدق المصدر كونه العربية، وأنتم تعرفون قناة العربية هي قناة سعودية. قالت أن أحمد علي عبد الله صالح، هذا قائد الحرس الجمهوري السابق، جاء إلى الرياض. تفضل. جاء إلى قبل أن أقول جاء جاء إلى الرياض وقال لهم: أريد منكم 3 أشياء وسأعطيكم شيء مهم جدا. قالوا: ما هو؟ قال: أولا، أن توقفوا الحملات الإعلامية ضدي وضد أبي. ثانيا، أن تسعوا لدى المجتمع الدولي لرفع العقوبات. ثالثا، أن لرفع العقوبات الدولية. الأمر الثاني، أن تؤكدوا الحصانة التي نالها في المبادرة الخليجية التي رعتها المملكة والمجتمع الخليجي. الأمر الأهم الذي سأعطيكم أنني سأخلص البلد من الحوثي. عرض بسيط جدا. أنني أنت عرفت الماذا؟
ما سمعتش آخر كلمة.
آخر كلمة: أنني سأخلص البلد من الحوثي وسأنهي حاجة اسمها حوثي في البلد.
He's relating a little specific piece of information that before the operation to before the current operation between Saudi Arabia and GCC, he adds the United States to it. We wanted, basically, everybody wanted to limit the Houthi influence in Yemen. Obviously, there actually were very many tribes who have actually secured large areas on the Saudi Arabian border. There's a story that Ahmed Abdullah Saleh, the son of the former president, has come to Saudi Arabia basically to tell them to stop the media campaign against him and his father, to basically lift the sanctions on his family, and basically he promised that he himself will lead a campaign to really end the Houthi threat in Yemen.
حاولت أن أنا طبعا ضد التوجه الحوثي وضدها كحركة مسلحة وضد كل الحركات في المنطقة وعملت في ذلك، وربما جل عملي الإعلامي كان في هذا التوجه، لكنني والله حاولت أن أهضم أو أن أقبل أو أن أتقبل هذا القصف ولو ب4% لم أستطع. Thank you. الأخ مستعجل.
Basically the idea is that he is against the war because he doesn't think that it's going to resolve anything.
Okay. Yes, Sama Al-Hamdani.
I'll try to be brief. I want to talk about how the Americans are viewed from the Yemeni perspective. Given everything that's happening, I completely understand the U.S. being cautious in endorsing this attack in more than logistical support. They are already in a tough corner, considering the drone strikes that are happening in Yemen that are extremely unpopular on the ground. I think the problem, or there's an opportunity here for the U.S. to play the role of mediator and peacemaker for once in the region. They can help bring the parties together and reach a negotiation, because at the end of all this war, at the end of sending ground troops or air troops, they're going to have to sit down and come up with a solution. Those Yemenis are going to exist. I've talked earlier about this being a war to eliminate an ideology, and there's no such thing as eliminating the Houthis or eliminating the Wahhabis or any of this rhetoric. It does not make sense. What the Yemenis can do is learn to coexist together, create a process that allows for pluralism. So my opinion is, although Americans try very hard to understand Yemen, Yemen is a very remote location. It's a very different culture. And I think that sometimes, because we're so different, that results in a creation of I versus you dialogue, or me versus them. And I think that there are Yemenis who speak English and can communicate these ideas. Unfortunately, there are some nuances that the West just cannot get unless there is a Yemeni person translating that to them. There is a sense that Yemeni life is worthless. And this sense comes from Yemenis themselves, who kill each other and spill blood everywhere. And this has been happening since 2011 to this point. Yemenis just generally feel that their lives don't matter. And I think this is an opportunity for the world to come and say, no, your lives matter. Do learn that you are worth something. The situation that we're in Yemen now can be narrowed down to the politics of 5 individuals. President Hadi, former President Saleh, Hamid al-Ahmar, Ali Muhsin, and Abdel Malik al-Houthi. The first 4 that I mentioned have been on the Yemeni political scene for years. Abdel Malik al-Houthi is the only newcomer to this spotlight. And the reason he succeeded very much is because he was able to take the youth and employ them in the Houthi movement. All the other factions failed to include the youth in these movements. The Houthis even were able to construct a show to present that women are participating in this effect. And so it shows you that they are more politically savvy than the other old parties that were on the ground. So I think everything in Yemen is a result of lack of leadership, poor good governance. Ever since 2011 till now, we had an opportunity to take Yemen out of the situation that it was in and lead it towards democracy. We've all talked about the GCC deal that granted President Saleh immunity, and as long as he remained on the ground, it meant that he could carry out operations. The problem here is that we have a president who's now residing in Riyadh. his strength in Yemen is getting weaker and weaker by the day. And it's very hard to imagine how he would go back and then rule again by just issuing orders. That's the only thing he can do. And that's how he ruled prior to 2014, by the way, is that he would issue orders for things to be carried out, but they would not be actually implemented. I think in order to move forward, the analysts in general, whether American or Saudi or from any other part of the world, they need to really sit down and take in Yemen's history. And I really do recommend to look at Yemen's history, not just in the past 4 years, not just in the past 20 years. I would say to look really, really back. We are tribes by nature, and we do take pride in our genealogy, and whatever vendetta we have from 50 years ago could still apply to this day. Having said that, if there is a process that is endorsed by the West, it's been proven in the past that every political party is willing to come and negotiate. A lot of people have suggested Oman as a neutral location, since Oman is the only country that has not participated in this airstrike, as a place where all factions can talk to each other. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Al-Hamdani. His Excellency Adel Al-Jubair will be here in less than 1 minute, we're told there. But there a question or two additional there. We Westerners, I'm one of them, have a problem thinking about tribes. Those who are Americans here, over 50, perhaps have seen no fewer than 30 movies, Cowboys and Indians, and the Indians were all tribal, and they were the bad people, and the non-Indians were the progressive good people, and the Indians were seen as violent, backward, illiberal, non-progressive, and in terms of what has happened to them, their lands, their resources, their mountains, their valleys, their rivers, their streams, were all taken over by and large from people, white people, Christian people largely, who came from Western Europe. So Americans have a difficulty on question of tribes. I come from the state of Virginia, where many of the tribes are still in existence, but living on reservations. Others of you come from elsewhere where the tribes are larger, and so are the reservations. But think of it in this context, because the British do not have this hang-up. Indeed, the British rule and role and position and power and prestige largely was through the tribes in the region. So with regard to tribes in a British sense, that power that for nearly 2 centuries held the ring of security and stability, they could not have done it without tribes and through tribes. So the American experience is radically different, and this means that we have proceeded with maybe 2 hands behind our back, because we say we don't do tribes, and largely we don't. But here is a self-inflicted wound, because what are tribes? Tribes are groupings of people. They're sociological and anthropological realities, forces, factors, and phenomena on the ground. And in places where the central government is weak, where the resources are few and scattered, and there's no strong central government, it is left to Plan B, to the pre-existing tribes, which have leaders. And tribes are not illiberal or non-democratic in many instances. They too live by consultation. They too live by consensus. This building's ethos, in terms of democracy, boiled down to a phrase, is the consent of the governed. How do you get the consent except by consultation? So the tribes are steeped in consultation and largely peaceful interior rule in terms of where people would go for security and stability. And up until the last 40 years, but still in some places, you went to your tribal leader for a scholarship, to get help to have medicine and health care, even to have a job or to get a position in the armed forces. So if you look at tribes from this perspective, they are the glue They're the adhesive. They're the lubricant that has kept this particular society together longer than would have, and more peacefully and effectively than would otherwise have been the case. It sounds as though I'm a member of a tribe, and I am. It's called the human tribe. We have His Excellency Adel Al-Jubair, who's arranged his schedule to be with us. Mr. Ambassador, you were not here when many of the questions were asked, but I will try to summarize some of them. If you would be good enough to respond. Are you comfortable with that?
Yes.
All right. Well, we had questions that were divided in the external category of what other countries are doing, your country, Saudi Arabia, other GCC countries, Iran, on one hand, and then the United States and the newly formed or declared Arab Joint Command to be based in Egypt on the other with its 10 countries. These are in the external realm. One that wasn't asked was will the oil surplus or the decline in oil prices, how that will affect Yemen, which depends on oil and gas for its limited revenue, as does your country and most of your GCC neighbors. So those would be on the external side, with one addition, and that is several questions, maybe half a dozen were asked about Sunni, Shia, and Iran, Saudi Arabia, tension, conflict, etc. On the internal side, questions about will Saudi Arabia give serious and favorable consideration to a ground offensive if it comes to that? What has been the price Saudi Arabia has paid economically, human resources, geopolitically, humanitarianly, morally, if you will, the people who are being killed in the airstrikes? And there are other questions having to do with the internal dynamics of Yemen and Ali Abdullah Saleh's role, because your government supported him, had your relationship with him, not for years, but for decades. And also your government had close and extensive relations with most, if not all, of Yemen's major tribes. And people used to criticize Riyadh for doing this. But in my own meetings with Ali Abdullah Saleh, he said, what choice do I have? I don't have the resources to deal with large segments of my people. If someone from the outside is willing to help meet the basic health care needs, education needs, security and stability needs, who would not have an outstretched hand of appreciation and gratitude for whatever country did that? The United States, even the Soviet Union, were it to be the case in years past. So this is a little bit of the nature of the external questions and the domestic ones. The domestic ones are charged with the understandable needs, concerns, and emotions of individuals who have relatives in Yemen who are suffering and who are uncertain about the near-term present, let alone the longer-term future. I've tried to summarize. Might you respond to these kinds of questions?
Yes. Thank you, John, for the opportunity to speak, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. Let me start off by talking a little bit about where we are in the operations. First of all, this is not something that we wanted to do. This was an issue of last resort for us. Nobody wants to use force and anger. But we were left with no choice. We spent years trying to establish a legitimate government in Yemen, years trying to help Yemen move from the chaotic situation it was in 2011 to a new, brighter, more stable future. As time went by, problems developed. We had the Houthis reneging on commitments that they made, 76 to be precise, in the past few years that they signed and then backed away from. Their aggression kept moving. They went from Sa'da to Amran to Sana'a, then they moved to Taz, and they threatened to capture the president's palace. They imprisoned the president and the cabinet in their homes in Sana'a. Thank God that most of them were able to escape and make their way to Taz. And so we had no choice but to respond to the call by the legitimate president of Yemen under Article 51 of the UN Charter to come in and support him and protect Yemen. So our objectives in Yemen are very simple. Protect the legitimate government of Yemen and protect the people of Yemen from a takeover by a radical group that is allied with Iran and Hezbollah. And we had a situation where a militia that is in control of ballistic missiles, and it was now in control of an air force. I don't believe there was a situation in history where an armed militia had an air force, and so this is something that cannot be tolerated. We tried to reason with them, we tried to reach agreements with them or broker agreements with them, but as I mentioned earlier, it all came to naught, and we ended up having to resort to force in response to the request by the legitimate government of Yemen. The operations are ongoing. We have targeted the Air Force, we have targeted air bases, we have targeted ballistic missiles, we have targeted heavy weapons depots, and we have tried our best to minimize collateral damage. There have been malicious charges made that the Saudi Air Force bombed a refugee camp. It turned out to be not the case. The site was not on our target list, nor were there any operations conducted above it, so it couldn't have been us. There were charges that Saudi Arabia bombed a milk factory in Hodeidah a few days ago. It turns out that the factory was bombed by the Houthis themselves in order to generate sympathy for themselves and hostility towards the coalition forces. So these things are going on. We believe that the coalition activities are achieving their objectives. It will take a little bit more time, but we're determined to prevail in Yemen, and we're determined to restore the legitimate government of Yemen and protect the people of Yemen from this radical group. With regards to the internal situation in the kingdom, of course, everybody is apprehensive about the use of force. Nobody wants to do it, but our people understand that it was necessary, and we have total support not only from the people of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but from people throughout the region for these military operations. The issue of Yemen's oil, unfortunately for Yemen, Yemen does not produce enough oil to export, so most of the oil, if not all of the oil that Yemen produces, is for domestic consumption. So therefore, the drop in the price of oil on the world markets really has no impact on Yemen. If anything, it reduces its import cost of oil that they have to purchase from outside. Did I cover most of that?
Yes, and there's some more.
Okay.
If I may ask them from here.
Sorry, Ali Abdullah Saleh. President Saleh,
yes.
We've had our ups and downs with him since he came to power. Sometimes he's been a friend and an ally, and sometimes he's been hostile to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. If you remember, in 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, President Saleh sided with Iraq against Saudi Arabia, and we cut off relations with him. So the relationship was not always an amicable one over the past 35 years. But again, he was the president of Yemen, and we had to deal with Yemen, and we had to deal with him. But now he has been playing a very negative role and a very destructive role in Yemen by aligning himself with the Houthis, by using what influence he has within the Yemeni military in order to persuade military commanders to side with the Houthis. The Houthis could not have made their advance from Sana'a to Ta'az and to Aden without the explicit and implicit support of President Saleh, former President Saleh, and the military units that he controls. And so we know this, the world knows this, and I believe that history will judge him harshly when it comes to Yemen and what he did to Yemen and his role in the current crisis. We again have been targeting units that are loyal to him or that are under his command or virtually under his command in order to degrade their capabilities and in order to make sure that the role that he has in Yemen and the role that the Houthis play in Yemen as a militia are limited or non-existent. Now, we recognize the Houthis are Yemenis. We recognize that the Houthis have a right to be part of the political process in Yemen, and we're not denying this. In fact, it was the GCC initiative that opened the door for the Houthis to participate in the Yemeni political process. But they cannot be a militia. They cannot have heavy weapons outside the scope of the state. That is a situation that is not tolerable. We see the consequences of that in Lebanon with Hezbollah, where a militia pretty much dominates the state and threatens state institutions. We will not allow this to happen on our doorstep in Yemen.
Super. These, I'll just read them out, and you're good on remembering them, and answer them as you will. Okay. Does it matter, one way or the other, if the United States lists the Houthis groups in Yemen under the designation of its being a terrorist organization? And as much as Saudi Arabia has designated of late various groups as terrorist organizations, is this among the options that Saudi Arabia has under consideration, or might it rule it out? Or what could be the implications? Either way, if you did or if you did not. That's one. Second one, your view of Aden. Aden, as we said earlier, used to be in the late 1950s the world's largest port in terms of tonnage handled and ships calling there. But things have moved on since then. There's Dubai, there's Salalah or Resut in Oman, nearer the east-west shipping routes. There is your Jeddah, and then there's Jazan, and other places that you're developing along the Red Sea. And Duqm in eastern Oman is a story yet to be known and told. That's one question. I'll let you think about it, about how this geostrategic, geoeconomic, logistical aspects of ports, of exports from the peninsula and imports into it. Why does that come on the radar there?
John, I'm getting old, so my memory is limited.
Okay, those are two.
Let me talk about the two.
All of us are.
The first one had to do with designating the Houthis as a terrorist group and what impact it has. I think it would be acknowledging a fact. What they have committed in Yemen is nothing short of terrorism. They've terrorized a population. They've taken over government property, government equipment illegally. They have invaded areas. They've pretty much tried to occupy the whole country. So if that is not terrorism, I don't know what terrorism is. It would have I don't know that it is. It will have an impact, I guess, from a psychological perspective in the sense of defining them and their actions as illegal and as criminal. But in terms of facts on the ground, I don't know what impact it will have in the short term. The second question with regards to economic support for Yemen, Saudi Arabia has been by far the largest contributor of economic assistance to Yemen ever since the civil war in Yemen ended in the late 60s and early 70s. We have built roads, schools, hospitals. We have sent medical teams. We have brought Yemeni students to Saudi Arabia on scholarship. We tried to help Yemen with its development plans, and we are committed to doing so in the future. We have, with our partners in the GCC, we believe that Yemen has the potential to thrive. It has a large population base. The Yemeni people are very industrious. They're very hardworking. They're very honest. And so we have in Saudi Arabia almost 4 million Yemeni people working in the kingdom. And we believe that Yemen, were it to have the legal infrastructure and the bureaucratic infrastructure that is proper, could be a magnet for investments by Gulf businesses where they can set up shops or factories in Yemen, fund agricultural projects in Yemen, take advantage of the abundance of labor in Yemen in order to produce items or food that can then be exported either to the Gulf countries or even sold in Yemen. So we have no hesitation about continuing our vast support for Yemen in order to help the Yemeni people. And that's irrespective of what happened to the port of Aden and what happened to the logistics in terms of shipping. We deal with the situation as it is, and the situation as it is now is we have a country that is one of the poorest in the world, with one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, with one of the highest malnutrition rates in the world, that has no water, to speak of, a country that is ripe with disease and that needs the attention and the support of the whole world in order to get back up on its feet. We are determined to help the people of Yemen and Yemen as a country to overcome the challenges it faces. But first, we need a stable and a legitimate government, and we need to find a way where we can end the divisions that exist in Yemen and prevent a radical group from taking over the country, and as part of a foreign-driven agenda that seeks to divide Yemen and that seeks to destroy Yemen and that seeks to create instability in the Arabian Peninsula. Super.
These are three questions then. Keying off that last one about those seeking to divide Yemen, outsiders for sure have investment in that kind of a strategic outcome, but so do those inside. And there is a movement, Iraq in the south, that would love to see another independent republic of South Yemen. So would a two-state solution ever be possible in Yemen, and what would Saudi Arabia's view be about that? You dealt with that reality for a long time, from 1967 to 1990 there. Could there be a reversion to that? Second question is the Houthis, like Iran, during Iran's 1979 revolution, are rejecting any form of Western influence. What does this mean for your major partner, the United States, that is ready and available and amenable to mediating if it can, but it takes two to tango? If the Houthis want to have nothing to do with Washington, understandable, but what are the implications of that? You want to answer those two, and then there are some more.
Well, with regards to the different movements in Yemen, I think they're driven by a sense of mismanagement, a sense of corruption, a sense of feeling that people's rights are being denied. And I think that if we can create a situation where we create a stable, legitimate government that's balanced, that represents all Yemenis, that works for the interests of all Yemenis, we wouldn't see these different movements in Yemen. I can't comment about a two-state solution or one-state solution in Yemen, because this is really ultimately up to the people of Yemen. We have always maintained that it is important to maintain the unity and territorial integrity of Yemen. The objective of our operations right now are to protect the legitimate government of Yemen and to protect the people of Yemen and to prevent the rise of a radical, militant, armed group on our southern border. So that's on the first question. With regards to the second question, the Houthi ideology is very clear. They've been very clear about what they stand for. Their education system and their textbooks have been very clear about who they perceive as their enemies. And I don't believe that the Houthis would, what they're advocating would be in the interests of Yemen, because it's not. They want to close Yemen off from the world, and they want Yemen to be a radical state that is allied with Iran and with Hezbollah, and that's not going to serve neither the Yemeni people nor the people of the region.
Okay. Thank you. That last comment subsumes one here about the alliance, rhetorical or political, ideological, with Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we won't go to that one as such. At which point, if any, of the Houthi power increasing, would Saudi Arabia withdraw its estimated $1 billion in the Yemen Central Bank, assuming it has not been looted? And second question, lots of these are great questions. They come from the media, NBC, CNN, C-SPAN, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Bloomberg, and the like. They're well-versed here. And they want to know, how much hard evidence is there of Iranian arms shipments and other support to the Houthis? None? A little? A lot?
A lot.
All right.
With regards to what we would do to withdraw our deposit from the Yemeni Central Bank, we're not going to withdraw it. It cannot be looted because these deposits tend to be numbers on computers, and so it's not some physical cash that we gave the Yemeni Central Bank. The Houthis are We are now much, much less worried about the Houthis taking over Yemen than we were before the operation started. We are degrading their capabilities, and we will destroy their capabilities, and we will protect the Yemeni government, and we will protect the Yemeni people, period. No question about it. And the operations are, as I mentioned earlier, ongoing. The objectives are being achieved, and we are working through these objectives in order to reach the conclusion that we all want. That's with regards to the issue of the central bank and the Houthis. With regards to Iranian support for the Houthis, it's very, very clear. The first thing that the Houthis did when they captured Sana'a was to release operatives of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and Hezbollah from the intelligence jails in Sana'a. The Iranians have been shipping weapons to the Houthis long before this conflict began. Those weapons include even shoulder-launched surface-to-air missiles. There was a shipment that was interdicted of Iranian weapons going to the Houthis. They are helping them to build certain facilities there, and so the evidence we have, and they're providing them with financial support. So the evidence is very clear to us, and we have no doubt about it. We also see it reflected in the public position that Iran and that Hezbollah have taken with regards to the conflict in Yemen and with regards to the Houthis.
Okay. This next one has to do with various aspects of Iran, and perhaps three aspects. Several questions about if you would address the question of to what extent, if at all, is it really Sunni versus Shia issues, ideological, political, geopolitical, versus revolutionary viewpoints versus the legitimacy of the incumbent governments in the region? I haven't seen that question, but that's an intriguing one.
Yes. I think the way we never wanted to have a sectarian conflict. We have in Saudi Arabia Saudi citizens who are of the Shia branch of Islam, and they're viewed as equal citizens to every other Saudi. All the rights that a Saudi citizen has, another Saudi citizen has, irrespective of what their ethnicity is or what their sect is. So this is not something that we want, a path that we wanted to go down the road to. The Iranians and Hezbollah have tried to stoke the sectarian fires in order to generate conflict in the Middle East. You see it in the speeches they give, you see it in the actions they take. We, on the other hand, and our allies in the Gulf have tried to avoid this. So we don't look at it from a perspective of Sunni versus Shia. We look at it from the perspective of good versus evil. There are those who want to build. There are those who want to bring countries together. There are those who want to create a better future for their people. And there are those who want to do the opposite. And so for us, any person or any leader or any government that wants to improve the lot of its people and take its country forward is a government that we're happy to work with, irrespective of what their sect or their ethnicity is. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia last year provided $500 million to the United Nations organizations working in Iraq in order to provide humanitarian assistance to the Iraqi people, and we insisted that it be irrespective of religion, sect, or ethnicity, and that the aid should go to all of the Iraqi people and be distributed through UN organizations, and that's exactly what happened. So we don't favor one sect over another. We look at every country as being a country, and all of its citizens being citizens of that country, and we don't go beyond that.
Okay, another related to Iran, two really. At various GCC heads of state summits for several years after the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, a sort of a sick joke that used to pass was that the United States attacked or invaded Iraq and Iran won. Without firing a single shot or shedding a single drop of blood. And something similar as a gift to Afghanistan earlier when the United States took down the Taliban. People would say that this is rare in the history of geostrategic dynamics. that a country that has a lot of people who want to hate Iranians more perhaps than others for the hostage taking, and then on the Iran side, hating some Americans or the American government for taking down Iran's first democratically peaceful, civilly elected government in 1953. So there are those who ask, how has this complicated everything that the United States is conducting these controversial, sensitive negotiations with Iran in Switzerland at a time when Iran has leaders that say we now control 4 Arab capitals, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere, and Lebanon. Some think it was intentional. Can you address this aspect? Because it's known that you and the other GCC countries would like to have at least been auditors or listener participants in these sensitive strategic negotiations between the P5 and Iran, but you were excluded, and excluded largely because I believe the United States asked Iran, what do you think? Is this all right? And Iran opposed, and so we accommodated Iran's position. How has this roiled the waters or made things more complex, convoluted than might otherwise be the case, and what are the implications?
Well, I think there are a lot of conspiracy theories that swirl around the Middle East, but I don't subscribe to them. The issue is there's no doubt that Iran benefited from the invasion of Iraq and the toppling of the Taliban government in Afghanistan. No doubt about it. The Taliban were Iran's ideological enemies, and Saddam Hussein was viewed as the bulwark against Iran stepping into the region. This happened. I don't believe that this was the objective of the United States at the time, but this is the situation that we're dealing with now. The question becomes, how do you stop Iran's mischief in the region? Their involvement in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, they're trying to cause problems in Bahrain, their involvement in Yemen. All of these are areas of great concern to the people of the region. Now, and this is irrespective of the nuclear negotiations. The issue of the nuclear negotiations, I don't know that I would characterize it as the Iranians excluding the Gulf countries from the talks. I think that it was set up to be the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, plus Germany as the largest economy in Europe, negotiating with the Iranians. We see the talks. We hope that the talks will succeed, because everybody wants a serious agreement that stops Iran's weapons-making ability. And so we have been assured, we are continuously briefed by the United States about the status of the talks and where they are at any given moment. And we have been assured by the Secretary of State that the negotiations, the objective of them is to deny Iran the ability to make an atomic bomb, to cut off all paths that could lead Iran to an atomic bomb, to limit the research, Iran's ability to conduct research, and to have intrusive and severe and continuous inspections on Iran's nuclear program. That's what the objectives are, and I think everybody would share those objectives. The thing that we cannot comment on is the details, because I don't believe the details have yet been worked out in terms of how the inspections would work, how the limitation on research would work. And so until we see those details, we really can't comment about whether this is a good deal or this is not a good deal. But like I said at the beginning, everybody wants a good deal that prevents Iran from developing an atomic bomb.
We have two more minutes in terms of our permission to be in here. Your views about the newly formed Arab League military coalition response force, and with regard to how can one really back President Hadi when he did not engage in deliverables in terms of what the Yemeni people expected, demanded, needed. And would that not rule out some role possibly for Ali Abdullah Saleh, if only indirectly, given his role in keeping a relative sense of security and stability in Yemen for not just years but decades? Is he completely out of the picture. I mean, in Geneva, with regard to Syria, it seems as though people lock themselves into a corner by saying that Bashar al-Assad must go. And now you see references to, well, maybe he can be part of the solution there. And then two last short ones, I guess, yes or no. Are there Saudi Arabian troops in Aden, and as reported? And you correctly noted 4 million Yemenis in Saudi Arabia. Ms. Hamdani, before you came, and Mr. Musawa mentioned about how many Yemenis are trying to get out and be evacuated, and they can't get visas except to Somalia. And they're stranded at airports, not just in Yemen, but throughout the world. These are the last two questions.
Okay, sorry, that was a series of, they were a series of two questions.
Yes. Okay, the one about Saudi Arabian troops in Aden, the visa one, yeah. And then, yes, that's right. And then Hadi, how can you support him when he's not proven leader?
We don't have troops, formal Saudi troops in Aden. The issue of using ground troops is always something that is on the table, but the decisions will be made depending on the circumstances and the need. With regards to President Hadi, the reason he wasn't able to deliver deliverables, which I disagree with that premise because I think he has, the reason that he is viewed as not having delivered deliverables is because he was being undercut by the Houthis and by former President Saleh. And so we had a number of Friends of Yemen conferences. We had projects that we were working with Yemen on with him as president. And I believe that given the opportunity that President Hadi would continue to do the right thing for Yemen. But it's impossible to be effective when you're being undercut, when people are taking away your ability to control your own territory, when people are undercutting you in the parliament, when people attack you and take over your capital, when people imprison you in your own home in Sana'a. That's not so. The problems were on the other side, not on President Hadi's side. He is the legitimate president of Yemen. Yemen, the GCC initiative and the outcomes of the national dialogue in Yemen call for a transition period during which a constitution would be drafted. This was done, and then the Houthis came in and redrafted it to their liking, which we don't accept as legal. Then you set up an electoral process, and then you go through elections, and then you have a new president and a new parliament, and life goes on, hopefully, towards a better future. That's what we were working on with President Hadi when these problems magnified and multiplied and put a stop to it. So I think I know he is the legitimate government. He is the legitimate president. He wants to do what's good for Yemen. And once Yemen goes through the transition period and moves towards a better phase, then it's really up to the Yemeni people to decide who they would like for their leader. But we don't believe that President Saleh has any role to play in Yemen's future. He spent 35 years or so driving the country into the ground, and he played a very dark role in the events in Yemen. And so now he was removed, and he continues to cause mischief behind the scenes, and we're doing our best to try to put an end to it.
Okay. Yeah, if you could just step a little to this. I want the audience, if it will please remain seated for 2 minutes while His Excellency leaves, but not before saying this is one of the best sessions we've had. This is standing room only here in this room, and on short notice at that, it shows a concern, a care about Yemen and the Yemeni people and the Yemen-U.S. relations and Yemen's plight, humanitarian, political, geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic, and otherwise. All the speakers kept within their 10 minutes, and we had more than 40 questions. And I think we covered somewhat of the waterfront, but especially we're grateful to our speakers and to His Excellency Ambassador Adel Al-Jubair. Thank you all.
Sorry?
Sorry, I need to get my... Got it.
Thank you. You took half my shit. Hello. Did I get it all wrong?